Up next, we shift the focus and talking about a new thing, which is perhaps not so new, which is curation. I mean, we see that signal loss, and we heard about this already, is accelerating throughout our industry. At the same time, advertisers want to have more demand, and they definitely want to have premium demand, CTV and all these kind of things we heard about. So perhaps curation is one solution to this kind of question. And welcome with me, Marie-Clare Puffett, Industry Development and Insights Director at IB Europe, who will moderating our third session on curation. A warm welcome.
Thank you, Jörg. I think we might need an extra chair. I think I get the prize for the largest panel today. So yeah, I'm going to welcome my panel. We have Filippo, who is co-CEO of Onetag. We have Frank Schofield, Director of Enterprise Sales and Commerce Media for EMEA at Magnite. Matt Adams, who is Regional VP of Media and Ad Tech at Microsoft Advertising. You've all got such big job titles. Sarah, who is Director of Marketplace Operations at Index Exchange. And Stefanie, who is Senior Director of Demand Sales at Comcast Advertising. So 30 minutes, one of me, 5 of you, curation. I'm not a curation expert, but I'm hoping in the next 30 minutes I will become one. So Jörg said curation is not necessarily new. I happen to agree. I think, you know, we've talked a long time in our industry about PMPs and, you know, deals. So I think we are potentially relabeling it, but you tell me if I'm wrong. So let's kick things off. Let's talk about what is curation, how have they evolved, and why is it so important right now? Why is it gaining traction with the advertisers? I don't know. I think you have the microphone at the end there, Filippo. So do you want to kick off? One mic between 5 of you. So
yeah, absolutely.
Listen.
So curation. Our definition of curation is pretty straightforward. Is the intelligent selection of media and data with an optimization that happens in real time for better outcomes. That's pretty much how we define it.
Why is it gaining ground right now?
Because again, we are entering more an efficiency area, an area of outcomes. So there's more focus on that side. So curation, if done right, if it's done through infrastructure, if it's done through an algorithmical approach, it's not just a linear traditional packaging of domains and data. It has to happen in real time. So right now there is a technology that can actually provide that type of a solution. And again, if done right, it can reduce fees, it can reduce inefficiencies, and ultimately can provide better outcomes. And I think outcomes are important if they put in the context of quality. So quality with outcomes, they go together, because an outcome by per se could just mean a click in a bad environment. So that's also something that we want to consider.
Frank, do you agree with Filippo's definition?
Yeah,
Well, no.
we'll get off to a flying start. Yeah, no, I definitely do. I think, like you say, sell-side decisioning is something that's been around for a very long time. I think maybe giving the power of that to the buyer is something that's really risen, and that's what we're talking about when we're talking about curation. In terms of what the buyer wants, it's still control, transparency, ROI. Like, that hasn't really changed through the whole, my whole career in programmatic, really. The way you do that is just get the decisioning as close to the supply as possible and try and cut out as many of those kind of intermediaries that maybe aren't adding as much value. And it's something that Magnite's always kind of focused on, is that direct integration with publishers, rather than, you know, having SSPs buying from other SSPs and having this quite kind of convoluted system. And really, that's what's going to simplify it. And that is kind of the benefit of curation, for sure, as we see it.
Matt, do you agree? Do you think this is going to lead to a more simplified ecosystem, or are we complicating things even more?
I think there's a risk of all of us pretty much agreeing on this topic, which is always fun and nice. We're all friends here. But yeah, so I mean, at Microsoft, I had the pleasure of being part of the Xandr acquisition, and, you know, was in that business previously. And we actually launched our curation platform. I think it was way back in 2019 now. So it's been a while. And we have seen some shifts for sure. So I think when we first brought that platform to market, you know, we had a big focus on what we call kind of asset monetizers, or kind of data businesses that were looking to essentially monetize their data assets, putting that on top of media deals, and then pushing that to end buyers within their DSPs of choice. I think the shift that, potentially these two alluded to was, more recently, we've actually seen the end buyers lean more and more into curation and start to actually try to build their own marketplaces themselves so they can exert that kind of control over the supply chain, leverage, pricing, preferential rates, and, ultimately get more transparency into the buying decisions that they're making. So we think, brands building marketplaces and, buyers ultimately leaning into curation is going to be the real path forward. We actually think the sell side of the industry is where that innovation is really going to happen. And that's what's going to lead to, ultimately more consolidated supply chains and more efficient buying. I mean, at Microsoft, we're all in on the sell side and curation. We recently announced the deprecation of our DSP Invest. So, with a lot of other sell side kind of representatives here, I think, that's why we're going to be pretty aligned on this topic.
Sarah, I've heard a lot about transparency and consolidation. Do you agree?
I have to say, I do agree with all three of you. I think really across the board, we have seen the concept of sell-side decisioning becoming more popular, but it's ultimately helped like reshape the collaboration across the industry as well. We're seeing more collaboration from the supply side with our media buyers, the media owners, and our DSP platforms as well. And I think that's definitely key to continuing that evolution and ultimately making supply smarter from the start, as opposed to needing to apply everything on the DSP side. From my point of view, I think when it talks to, is this going to make the supply chain simpler? I think the answer is it can, if that's what the buyer wants. And I know we have a number of buyers who are actively looking at that today. And it's about working with partners who are transparent and are able to, like Index, provide information on where all of the fees are going within the transaction and allowing media buyers to make those decisions around where they should continue to invest and ensuring that their media spend is doing the most for them.
Stefanie, thoughts?
To add to that.
Yeah, that's already quite a lot.
No, but honestly, when I was invited to come to the panel, I thought about like curation. I really had to think about it, and at the risk of sounding a bit weird, but curation has been around. And I think coming from a CTV world, free will being the answer of broadcasters and streamers, we've always been doing curation. But what has changed, and to your point, Filippo, is the intelligence added to every single impression that is evaluated in a different way to make it more valuable for the end buyer. And that's really where this shift has been coming from. Broadcasters, streamers wanting to make their inventory much more shoppable. And that comes with things like adding standard attributes to really add another layer. It's become more intelligent in a way, the way the curation has been done.
Well, it all sounds really positive so far, but there must be some challenges, right? And what does, thinking about the data that we need to make this work, has that increased enough? Has the supply of data increased enough? And as a result, does the value of publisher first party data go up or remain the same, or does it become a challenge for publishers? Like,
the challenge is now, if you stay in a siloed environment, publisher by publisher, there is a risk of getting too granular and therefore lacking scale. So that's where, as an SSP, and where you have the ability to package that type of inventory, where you get back to the scale. So in a way, yes, it can get too granular, and then you, as a buyer, you don't get the scale that you need. But if you work together, and what we heard earlier, broadcasters coming together, creating marketplaces for them to have much more power against walled gardens, for example.
So yeah, I think first party data is extremely important to kick it off with, whether that be publisher first party data or buy side and advertiser first party data and the likes of retail media, etc. it's going to become more and more important as we see more signal loss, as we've talked about earlier. I feel like saying cookies are going away is a bit like saying it's a year of mobile, but cookies are still actually going away, and they're slowly degrading, and their importance is also becoming less. So I think this is where, particularly on the supply side, because we see the full brunt of the full internet as an SSP, there is far more opportunity to overlay data and still get the scale, which I think is important. I think this is why curation on the supply side and on the sell side is becoming, a buzzword, and is why we're here talking about it today. And I think there's also many ways to do that. There is published first-party data. There is, looking at the IAB's framework for curated audiences. There's other third parties creating their own registered taxonomies. And then I heard earlier someone mentioned custom algorithms as well. Index is partnering with custom algorithm companies to look at many different fields within the OpenRTB spec today to ultimately find the right individual impression opportunity for the individual advertisers. And I think that is very much like where we will see the innovation come from.
I think the one thing I would just add to build on that point actually is, in terms of activating data and extracting the maximum value from data, like there's a real efficiency point here as well. And, that also plays a little bit into the sustainability space. I think, in the modern world, it's not really viable for SSPs to be passing billions and billions of impressions over, or bid requests over to DSPs, and expect the DSP to comb through that and really, find that one user that buyer wants to target, right? So, by moving the decisioning to the sell side, you actually really reduce that kind of volume of requests that you're passing and enable buyers to only see the actual users that they want to target. We also know that all DSPs and SSPs are doing some level of filtering just because the volumes are just too big to listen to everything. So again, by only on the sell side exposing the things that buyers actually want to access, it means they're actually getting the full visibility into those users that they want to target, and not having, a large part of their audience filtered out because of kind of efficiency algorithms and things. So yeah, I think that's important.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that as well, so it's not, the sustainability narrative is hugely important as well. Like we can already measure and show that the carbon footprint is massively reduced when you're acting in this way, exactly as you say, Matt. I think also it's just down to like operational efficiencies. So like anyone who's worked like ops or ad ops or anything knows that there's a huge amount of troubleshooting involved in programmatic when you're just setting up basic deals. But the more that you are only sending the inventory that you want to buy, the more that you actually see, okay, we're filtering this out for this reason. So yeah, operational efficiencies, it's more sustainable, but I think, yeah, there's definitely a huge benefit even just on that increase in scale, as we kind of mentioned previously as well, in terms of applying that data on the sell side.
I think I forgot the question, but
Yeah, me too.
no, I'm joking. I think everything has been already said, but a couple of points that I think are interesting also from our perspective. One is the element of being really complementary to what the DSP does. I think we started as a DSP actually, which is pretty unique as a supply side platforms actually. So we understand how difficult it is to understand what is good and what is bad. And to understand what is good, you need to buy something, to learn something. So the burn and learn approach is something that is not very efficient for a DSP, obviously. And I remember last year at Jones Media event in New York, Chris Kane was always talking about the importance of having fat pipes instead of having multiple thin pipes, which is one important element, but it's also important to have smart pipes in that sense, right? Because you could have multiple pipes that are not maybe huge, but if they are taking the supply in the right approach in terms of being really smart, how now can they enrich every single impression with multiple data? First party data is definitely one. Semantic data or contextual targeting is another one. But also you can actually gather multiple raw data. You can make sense of the quality of the page, of the single placement. Like, for example, out to content ratio. So how cluttered is the page of the publisher. The time in view, how much the time people spend on a specific portion of the page. Collecting GPIDs is another element. So all these type of signals actually made sense of them in real time is what actually makes a pipe really smart instead of just passing the inventory along. I think it's really important.
And just going back to the title of the panel, how to win with curation for publishers, what's the win here? What's the kind of upside?
I can say very briefly. I mean, I think I've been on the publisher side for many years, and I understand that every time there is a new thing coming up, publishers get nervous because they tend to think about losing control, which I think it's definitely good to know about that. And I think there is a lot of education that still needs to happen in curation. So being open to have questions from the publishers and explaining what type of benefits. And I think explaining benefits also means explaining benefits with data. For example, we have seen an increase in bid density up to 40%. Bid density means more competition on a single impression, and more competition brings ultimately better prices for the publishers, which is roughly between 25 and 30% increase. Publishers can do curation themselves. Obviously, they can actually have the ability to tap into a curation platform and take advantage of that in order to promote their inventory with first-party data. So I think it's a matter of educating and making sure that there is a collaboration and transparency also in the way curation can bring value to the constituencies of the supply chain.
Frank, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think like that kind of fear of putting all of the or giving all of the control to the buy side is definitely something we've heard from publishers, but it has to be control on both sides, right? And the publisher also has control because it's ultimately always going to be up to them as to where their ads are sold and who are buying them. So that's really, really important. It's also about kind of transparency on both sides. So publishers can opt in or out of any marketplace that is being set up. So it might be a certain agency is being set up and they're keen for this, but they're not keen for, some other kind of partner. So that's really important. I think it's also like a real opportunity for publishers to build out kind of that direct relationship with the buyer a lot more. And they might see that a certain inventory section is being bought by this particular marketplace that has been set up by a particular agency. And it's an opportunity to either, review pricing or try and kind of amplify that audience that they're buying as well.
Yeah, this is potentially quite a straightforward answer, but obviously us bringing buyers onto the sell side via curation just brings those buyers, which are the value creation point ultimately, one step closer to the publisher, right? So it enables publishers to have more direct relationships, be closer to demand, and ultimately kind of exert more control, which reduces the risk of being disintermediated over open auctions and across multiple platforms. And I think, yeah, if you're a publisher, you want to be as close to your buyers as possible, and that's what ultimately curation powers, I think.
This is going to be great. I agree with all of you, but I think the control element is really important, and with curation coming that step closer, it's really about the publishers also then having the control to add their value. Their value may be their first-party data, it may be rich media units or high-impact units or shoppable units that we heard about earlier. And it's about them being able to do that with their rule set still in play. So that may be particular flooring or priority strategy or advertiser blocks. And the media owners having this control, I think, is very key for how they're going to win. I think also, publishers can lean in and they can collaborate with partners such as Magnite and Xander here and Onetag to lean in and learn and ultimately choose a framework that they trust and ensure that they're getting the transparency that they need, and they're also seeing the innovation out of curation as well.
I forgot the question. No, but I could answer that one, which I agree. Control is one thing, making a single impression more valuable to the buyer. And I think that's probably the next question, which is what does it make it more valuable for a buyer? And we've heard from Emma about outcomes, which seems to be the other buzzword, and working media. It's becoming more and more difficult for marketers to really prove how each single impression works. And that's where this all comes together, and hopefully, do you want to say something? And hopefully we'll bring more ad revenue into those publishers with more sell-side decisioning.
I feel like we've just solved all of the industry's problems. Transparency on the buy side, control on the sell side, more valuable impressions. Like, is curation really the holy grail? Is it really the answer to all of this? Without putting playing devil's advocate.
I think it's it's a fundamental shift in the industry. I think the last big shift that we saw was header bidding, and yeah, there were good things, and there were potentially maybe some not so good things that came out of that. But I think we're very much like, it's a big shift. I think we will continue to see innovation, which I think the key here is the innovation. So what innovation is this going to drive? And I think the answer is a lot.
Yeah, I think there's always a funnel or, a tail of buyers. So, I think curation, definitely solves the problem for the premium end and large buyers, large brands who, have that data to activate and who, really want to lean into these kind of, sophisticated solutions. I think there'll always be a longer tail of advertisers that, probably will, do well to work with more kind of traditional ways of buying and more kind of open approaches. But yeah, for the kind of, large brand budgets and things, I think it's definitely, one of the ways we can solve a lot of the challenges we have today.
Yeah, down this end, it does get harder, doesn't it, as you get towards the end of the question? But no, I completely agree. I think like potentially a way you can open up that longer tail is if you do look at that data application across a whole range of supply, and because you're increasing the amount of scale, it means you're no longer just working with the publishers that have enough scale for their own data, right? And you can start to apply either an SSP's data, like Magnite has our own, or it can even be a third party or whoever it is, and really start to open up the pool of inventory rather than just saying, right, I've got these publishers because I know I'm going to scale with them, but let's open it up to everyone that we've got available on that platform.
Filippo, do you have anything to add, or we could see if there's questions?
I only have one reflection, which is a bit broader. I was thinking about the future, right? Where things will, how things will play out in the future. I mean, we have a DSPs and the SSPs, and that are typically represented two different sides of the same coin. Will everything go straight into being one platform doing everything? I'm not saying it's going to be curation, because I mean, a few years ago, supply side platforms were kind of commoditized. Supply was commoditized. Now people are starting to say maybe that DSPs are starting to be more commoditized, especially for certain type of activations. So I think maybe there is a convergence happening in the market. So consolidation is happening across the board overall. But I think also in terms of, do we really need multiple platforms to do maybe certain type of campaigns? Maybe something more complicated like performance is needed. Maybe for something more straightforward like upper funnel campaigns, maybe one entry point could be better, more efficient in that sense. And there are obviously companies like the Trade Desk who have done some certain type of initiatives, others like Pamatic, and others who have done other type of initiatives to try to get closer to either the buyer or the supply side. I think this is an interesting trend in the market. So I don't have the answer, but I think it's interesting to observe how things will play out.
We have, oh, go on.
No,
Matt.
I think your comment is a really interesting point, actually. Like, something I've heard is like people start talking about SSPs for buyers, right? Or building a buyer UI on top of an SSP, which is kind of an extension almost of curation or quite similar. But then the question then becomes, well, at what point is that UI a DSP, right? And, do we need both? And what happens there? And then agentic platforms, how do they play into that? So yeah, I think there's a lot.
I was hopeful we were simplifying things up until now. So now I feel like we've overcomplicated it again. Any questions from the audience? One over there. Go on.
Just before that, because we're hybrid, we have an online question as well. So we're going to prioritize a bit, and then I'm going to come back to you. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Let me just get to it. So outside of the agency ecosystem, do you see brands adapting curation as a tool to run campaigns?
Yeah, so we've seen quite a lot of interest from brand directs around the curation side, but I think they have quite different like views to exactly what they're using curation platforms for. So I know obviously agencies are representing the brand, but often it'll be their data that they're trying to bring into it and curate against, or it'll be some sort of data partnership that they've got. I think for the brand, anyone that's speaking directly to the SSP normally has quite a developed like programmatic team already, and they're really just going back to that transparency and control piece and being able to report on everything that's happening on the supply side, no matter the DSP they're using, has been a real kind of factor that they're kind of looking for as well.
Yeah, I would agree. At Microsoft, we've seen both. So, I think traditionally this kind of started, as I say, with kind of data owners and what we would call asset monetizers, but with buyers that are leaning into curation, definitely to begin with, large holdcos, big agencies were kind of setting up their own marketplaces to, build products and solutions to sell to all of the brands they represent. But we have more recently seen, some of the largest brands, even within that, want to kind of establish their own marketplaces in a way that's a little bit more direct. So, partnering with ourselves, in a more unique way, particularly again, where they want to get that real transparency, and control over their own supply chains. I think someone mentioned procurement earlier. I think, that's a story that definitely can resonate with procurement teams when you're talking about, controlling costs on the supply side and increasing working media. So, especially brands that are kind of taking control of their own technology contracts, they've, definitely started to ask that question: how can we build a marketplace?
Yeah, similar. We've had brands approach us directly, particularly when they have large sets of data that they don't want to share with or can't share with other partners. So that's just to add to that question.
Do you want to go with your question?
20 if you want.
Just one.
So, so for transparency, I work for an independent DSP. We've been doing curation for like 4 years or so it's nothing new. However, with this kind of new wave of it being the latest thing, everyone talked about curation. Last year was all MFA, right? Does the panel think that there's a danger here in supply quality when you're looking to fuel the thirst for engagement points to feed this curation thirst, right? Which means that, because I look at all your sellers JSON files, right? And I'm starting to see a decrease in quality, pointless resellers. And the answer that always comes back from my contact person is, oh, it's to fuel curation and engagement opportunities. So how are you actually moderating and improving the supply? Or are you going to use curation as an excuse to start culling suppliers?
Who wants to take that? I like that question.
Yeah, and I think it just comes down to like what the buyer's really looking for, right? And there's a whole load of curation partners are out there, and it might be a data partner that of course has their own data. It might be someone that's using their own algorithm, for example, for performance. And it's really then down to the buyer as to like what they're looking for, and does that partner add value? I think with curation, particularly if you're working directly with the SSP to build your own marketplace as a buyer, you're really just looking for how can I get as close to the supply as possible without having, an SSP that is calling another SSP, which is calling another SSP, really trimming down on the tech tax and just making sure as much is going on working media as possible. So yeah, really down to the buyer to kind of justify and define what it is exactly that they're going to look for in the market.
I think on our side, our supply quality guidelines haven't changed. We continue to invest in our direct relationships with our publishers and work with very few intermediaries, and that's not going to change. We want to enable marketplaces to access premium supply, which I think is key, because ultimately the better quality supply, the better outcomes it does drive, because the users are truly there to engage with the I guess website, as opposed to MFA. We all know MFA doesn't, like, sure, it may drive clicks, but it's not actually driving true outcomes, which I think is key.
We may have time for one final question. I think there's one at the back. Nicole.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, with DSPs like The Trade Desk launching access to marketplaces with a tick of a box like the SP 500 Plus, do you see other buying platforms adopting this type of easy access to curation? And will this be used as an alternative by buyers versus working directly with SSPs?
I don't think curation replaces DSPs. I think the point about sell-side decisioning is more an equilibrium in the market as opposed to a replacement. A DSP is still going to exist, and all of the different programs that a DSP build are still going to be there and useful to some buyers. I think you mentioned earlier, it's very much about like, well, how big is the buyer? What are they buying and what are their intentions? So I think the answer is no, it's still going to exist and we're still going to coexist. And that's the way to have a very efficient ecosystem, but one that works for both buyers in mind and one that works primarily as a supply side technology with publishers in mind.
I mean, just speaking to my experience in Microsoft, we're obviously a media owner and a publisher, as well as an ad technology provider. So I think we have a bit of experience, doing both. We actually use our own curation platform to push media packages and curated deals that we've made of our own supply and our own third-party publishers that sit on our monetized SSP into DSPs like the Trade Desk. So we do see that as something that will continue and, an easy way for them to activate on deals to get them high quality supply. Then there's the larger buyers, as I think we've been talking to here, which will really want to get hands-on keys with the technology and actually lean into building their own marketplaces. And, that's the bit that I think will start to increasingly happen, on the sell side outside of the DSP.
One final word. I think the Trade Desk initiative is a great initiative in general, but it's also kind of a simplistic approach. It's kind of easy to buy from the top 500 publishers, top tier 1 publishers. I mean, it's almost like an inclusion race, right? The complementarity of what curation can bring it to the table is actually discover content that is not easily findable in the marketplace, right? I mean, the tier 2 publishers that have quality content can be discovered if you can actually onboard those publishers directly and understand the quality of their placement, and then potentially package that to provide additional and complementary type of supply. So I think those two things go together, but one doesn't replace the other one. I think they are complementary again.
Cool. I think we're out of time. So thank you very much to my panel.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marie-Clare.